Welcome to another edition of the Ivanti Insights Podcast. Adrian Vernon here. And you know what? We do not have our usual cast of characters. No. Chris Gettle, Daniel Spicer, they are not here today. They're taking a break. You know what? We have three special guests to talk about a special report. I want to introduce each of those guests right here, right now. So just last week, Ivanti partnered with Cyware, that's C-Y, WARE, and then Cybersecurity Works to publish a Ransomware Index Spotlight report. So today, I'm joined first by Sri Makamala, who is Ivanti's Senior Vice President of Security Products. And Sri has been on Ivanti Insights before when Ivanti acquired RiskSense. And Sri was the CEO of RiskSense and came over to Ivanti. How are you doing, Sri?
Doing well, Adrian. Thank you for having me again.
Great to have you here again. And then, Sri, we are joined by a couple of first-timers who are outside of the Ivanti organization. So, Sri, let's give a big hand and a big warm Ivanti welcome to Aaron Sandine, who is the CEO at Cybersecurity Works. Aaron, welcome to Ivanti Insights.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Srinivas, for the invite.
All right, great to have you here. And Aaron, you are located out in the Valley of the Sun, just in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And then we have Neil Dennis, who is a senior intelligence analyst at Cyware. How you doing, Neil?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me in this wonderful room of pretty big wigs here in the room. So thank you.
Well, you know what? By the end of this, I think we're going to be bowing down to you, Neil. So, and you are located out in Texas. So we have, and then Sri and I are in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have the Western United States pretty well covered here today. So appreciate everyone coming on. We're talking about this new Ransomware Index Spotlight report, which, by the way, you're going to be able to find a link to it right in the description, and you should be able to find it right on the homepage of Ivanti.com. So, all right, folks, let's get into it. Bottom line is, from this report, threat actors and ransomware groups, they are continually upping their game. I don't know if this is really news to anybody. You know, the threat actors, the ransomware continues to be on the rise. So, Aaron Sandine, CEO of Cybersecurity Works. Aaron, we're going to start with you. Tell us about this new report. How frequently do we put this report out, and who benefits from it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it. So this cybersecurity ransomware report comes out. It's an annual report that we update on a quarterly basis. We have a dedicated team of researchers that are continuously out there looking for new threats, new trends, new ransomware kits, new ways to exploit and take advantage of these. So this dedicated team is continuously on a daily basis looking for all this information. And we're working directly with our customers to make sure that they understand how this impacts their organization. And what happens is, on a quarterly basis, we take this up, we roll this up into a report, and we analyze how it's trending from quarter to quarter. So we are able to take a look at what new ransomware capabilities are identified, what new trends are, what exploit kits are out there, what groups are using these to take advantage of different organizations. And so we're constantly using this. We share this with the public on a quarterly basis so that other organizations can use this research to make sure that they're better protecting their organization.
All right. So Neil, Sri, just want to check with you before we move to our next question. Did Aaron miss anything in his overview of this report?
No, he didn't miss anything. But one thing I like about what Cybersecurity Works is doing that's going to help our customers is the way they construct this as a knowledge graph. They look at the common weakness, the CWE. They look at the CVE, the common vulnerability. They look at the actual payload, what's being used, and a collection of payloads, which we call them exploit kits. And they look at, is it a ransomware groups using it? Is it actually being used by APT groups, nation-sponsored, state actors, espionage? So they actually build a complete knowledge graph where each one becomes an edge and you can drill down and get that additional context. I love the way they're putting a knowledge graph. Where I like Ivanti adds the most is really being able to consume this and help prioritize which vulnerabilities to fix, which patches to apply, and are they really meaningful. So because we support about 200 million assets from a patch perspective, and one of the end goals of a ransomware attack is you got to apply a patch, you got to put a control in place, you got to have some compensating controls if you can patch or change the code. I like the way we help our customers really mitigate, be proactive about it, and recover from it. So I love the overall analysis of how cybersecurity works, does it as a knowledge graph. And we can give it to the threat intelligence platforms. We can give it to the vulnerability intelligence platforms. We can use it as part of the pen testing or ransomware assessment as a service. So that's the only fine point I would like to add, Adrian, on that point.
Okay, sounds good, Sri. Neil, I'm going to give you one chance here. As we ascertained a couple minutes ago, you're the bigwig of the group. So I want to give you the last chance here. So Neil Dennis from Cyware, anything else you'd add about kind of the positioning overview of this report itself?
Yeah, I think as from an intelligence analyst perspective, context is key, right? And from the Cyware's perspective, our goal is to try to find ways to not just help break down stovepipes, but also automate those intelligence items to where they need to be, what those actions need to be taken on your security stack to make things better, quicker, more efficient. And you can't do that without a good source of data, and you can't do that with good enrichment, without good enrichment. So between Cybersecurity Works, Ivanti, couple that with some automation orchestration endeavors, and in theory, everything becomes a little bit less complicated to get the right job done in the right amount of time. So
now let's go from the high level. Let's dive just slightly deeper. And let's say, Sri, I'm going to start with you. From Ivanti, what was the most interesting or surprising finding from this report in Q3?
So there are a couple, and I think Neil and Aaron touched on it a little bit. Context is king. And with context, you can put automation, you can reduce the amount of time it takes. So let me break what that context is and what surprised me on this report. There are about 40 vulnerabilities and exploits actually being used by advanced persistent threat groups. That number has increased. You can see the commonality on the bad guys joining forces, right? The increased number was a little surprising to me. The second one that also intrigued me rather than a surprise was about 31 exploit kits. So the payload on ransomware is no more one individual exploit. They're trying to use multiple exploits to be very successful. So that was an intrigued component. Neil talked about automation. The ransomware guys are automating as well. Once you get in, let me use multiple payloads to get that initial foothold and allows me to laterally move within the network. So once I get in, I try one exploit. Once I get initial access, I want to try another. So they're taking more of a corpus approach rather than individual. So that's a very intriguing thing. The one thing I also liked is we have about 900 plus common weaknesses that are actively used by vulnerability authors, good or bad. It's a very small number that's actively being used by the vulnerabilities the ransomware authors are going after. It's a 52. And one surprising thing, what I found was majority of the weaknesses that are tied to the vulnerabilities used by ransomware authors were already a part of WASP Top 10, Open Web Application Security Project Top 10, and MITRE's NSA sends top 25 most dangerous software errors. Massive correlation from what we've been telling you should not have this in your code, and yet organizations and developers are making these errors, leading a path for ransomware to be successful. So this is where the whole DevSecOps play comes in. If you include a weakness and a software error, that's going to lead to massive, massive problems. To me, that was very interesting. I'll touch upon what was surprising to me. And the other one, what I found very interesting is while we have thousands and thousands of vendors, majority of the focus was around about 96 vendors. I mean, nothing, right? It's about market reach. And one interesting fact, which most vulnerability researchers won't like, and when we set our SLAs and what I call KPIs, right? Key performance indicators, we look at, let's go fix critical CVSS and high CVSS and ignore all the low and medium. What this report shed light on is there are several medium and low CVSS vulnerabilities with known exploits that ransomware is taking complete advantage of. So most of your SLAs, most of your metrics today will miss this. And that's a complete advantage the ransomware guys are taking. I think that was very intriguing for me. So finally, I'll set it up with the 4 weaknesses that were very, very surprising and not surprising for me were the 6 new weaknesses that were added this quarter. The first one was authentication bypass by spoofing. Classic ransomware attack vector. The second one was insufficiently protected credentials. Use of hard-coded credentials. Missing authorization. All of them are in the top 25 programming errors, software errors, and in the WASP top 10. Interestingly, those are the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities that ransomware guys are going after to speed up their entry into organizations and create that havoc and cause disruption to humanity, right? So these were my few points, Adrian.
All right. Thank you, Sri. Neil, let's turn it over to you. From Cyware, what stood out to you or jumped out to you in this Q3 report?
I always find it fascinating, the speed of exploitation of any threat actor group out there. And so earlier on, mid-year this year, we saw, I think it was Rebel, take advantage of a wonderful exploit that hadn't quite been published yet, right? So implications are either they actually were the ones who developed the exploit themselves, and this is a company trying to catch up to it and publish this out, patch it before it gets too far spread, or somehow they magically get access to something before it gets into NVD, right? Coming from 20 years back when I used to work on the government side, the realm of 0 days were still there. Everybody was still looking to do this in the original exploits in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it was usually a place for APTs to be kind of first out. And when someone would publish some kind of vulnerability, the general expectation was if there wasn't a proof of concept published, nation state, plus or minus a week, they'd probably reverse engineer it and put it out. Public threat actors, cybercrime, all those months, if they're lucky, right? Just the speed of access to data, the capabilities and intent, all that stuff. And now we're seeing the kind of paradigm shift to where you don't necessarily have to be an APT vertical to still be developing, 0 days. Angler exploit kit back in the day with all the PDF exploits and active, or Flash rather, exploits. That was a wonderful thing to see. It kind of went away for a little bit. People started using known nodes, and now we're back, I think, into the echelon of the threat actors hiring teams potentially to develop 0 days and or, make faster turnaround on known exploits. So I think to me, that's kind of surprising to see things coming out pre-publication, pre-proof of concept. And that's a big state change from where we went after Angler for several years to where we're coming back to now. So I think it's been swinging back and forth a little bit more towards the bad side of things.
Okay. Boy, it's a strong draw to the dark side. As you say, if we could use a Star Wars analogy there. All right, Aaron, as we complete the roundtable on this question, Aaron with Cybersecurity Works, is there anything that stood out to you that Neil and Sri haven't already covered?
I'll piggyback off what Sri said. He was talking about the number of vendors, right? So we went, slight increase to 98 new vendors that we're tracking across these vulnerabilities. I think the other thing that's interesting to me there is it's the number of products. And so again, it's not a huge number, but it's 760 different products that we're tracking these vulnerabilities across. And as you start to look at these organizations and our customers and people that are trying to protect themselves, this is where it starts getting a little complicated. And I think this is where, the Ivanti platforms, along with our services, where we can help our customers understand, of our environment, where are our challenges, where are our issues? And then how do you start to group those? How do you start to treat these as a project so that you can make progress towards it? I've seen, from my own personal experience working in public and private sector, as well as, working with our customers, it's just a matter of, pulling the right resources together, understanding, being able to identify where our problems are, being able to figure out what those remediation steps are. Is it patching? Is it new controls that we need to put in place? How do we really put a project around it? Because I see so many organizations just struggling to figure out, where do I even start? How do I get traction across these things? And so, 760 products is not a lot of products, and every organization has a different kind of collection group of that, but being able to identify those things and prioritize those, it gets harder and harder, with these organizations, and that pool is just continuing to grow.
All right, Aaron, don't go anywhere. We're going to lead off with you on our next question. So obviously, as we talked about earlier, and Sri, as you know, we've talked about this on previous Ivanti Insights episodes as well. Ransomware, it's not going away. That's obvious. What can organizations do to secure themselves from bad actors? Aaron, let's start with you.
Yeah, so a little bit of background and history on myself. So I've worked for Microsoft, Intel, United Health Group. I was working for the state of Arizona for 6 years. 4 years of that was as the CIO for the state. That's where actually Srinivas and I met. And so at the time, we went through a set of audits at the state where we had some serious issues. And so we were really starting our security program completely from scratch. And in some of the conversations I had with Srinivas, it was, if you think about public sector, state government in a lot of states, it's very broken up. It's very federated. And so within the state of Arizona, there's over 170 boards, agencies, commissions, different committees that are within that. And as the CIO, you have the ability to govern them. You don't have the ability to control any of them. And so even just understanding, how many applications does the state have and what are critical applications and what applications, have what types of data out there. And so one of the first engagements that Srinivas and I started with was, let's go find our applications, and from that, we started to, be able to prioritize, okay, from these applications, which are the critical applications? How do we start to do vulnerability assessments across the different agencies? And so we had to build a risk-based approach across that and work with the governor's office, work with the legislature to educate them on where are the challenges, how do you start to invest in this? How do you start to just even get some visibility around this? And so yeah, ransomware is not going away. And as Neil was saying, it's just getting more complicated. The pendulum swings. But when you're looking at a lot of these organizations, they just don't have the resources to be able to effectively identify where their issues are and to understand these things. And so I would say, a lot's changed, over the last 10 years since Sri and I have been working on this, right? And I think, you look at these compliance frameworks and you look at these cybersecurity frameworks, and I think they provide a lot of good sets of best practices to get started. And, a lot of this just comes down to hygiene and organization, and I think where I'm seeing a lot of change right now is organizations have gone from the, I'm not doing it to the, I'm doing it on a once a year basis where I'm compliant with what compliance requires me to do, where now I think I'm starting to see organizations that are getting serious about security, and they're moving from once a year from a compliance perspective to how do I start to mature my program? How do I start to get some real insights into this, and how do I start making progress? And so they're moving to quarterly, they're moving to monthly, and they're even, in some cases with some of our customers, starting to move to continuous. And I think that's where it takes a lot of maturity. It takes a lot of focus to be able to start to do that. And it's one thing just to run a scan on an annual basis and then to take it and not to do anything with it, to building up a team where you can actually take that, that data, that information, be able to prioritize it, be able to group it, and then be able to go off and remediate it. And there's a lot of work there. And so that's where I think things are starting to go. And I think that's where organizations need to, invest in their maturity, invest in their team, invest in their partners, invest in that kind of overall ecosystem so that they can make progress towards cleaning this stuff up.
Yeah. So Aaron, you bring up a good point. You talk about people are starting to move away from maybe that annual checkpoint, that bare minimum compliance. And hey, let me check this off yearly. That's not nearly enough, right, Sri?
Absolutely not, right? So that's one of the things I love it, right? So the data is key. I mean, and Neil touched on it, right? At the speed at which they're weaponizing and actually using them to be successful in an attack is becoming a daily thing, not a weekly thing or a quarterly thing or an annual thing. So this is where being able to ingest the data and really use it in a final action is important. And that's where I love the partnership with Cyber and with Cybersecurity Works. We are the facilitators of the fix. At the same time, Cyber can get the message out, automate the triage, and help them prioritize. And CSW can really look at what the problem is more on a continuous basis through some of the services they're offering for our customers, like continuous vulnerability management as a service, trying to be proactive on this whole topic.
All right, let's go to Bigwig Neil. So Neil, did these other two bigwigs, is there anything they missed about what organizations can do to secure themselves from bad actors?
Yeah, once again, threat intel perspective, right? So we've got leadership roles perspective, which is great to see some takes on breaking down stovepipes and the fact that there are still those walls that need to be busted down. I think on that same note, I think culturally speaking, we've seen a big shift over the last couple of years where the new CISOs and CIOs that are coming out aren't these people who grew up in a compliance-driven world, which is great, right? So I see a lot of my friends who are becoming CISOs now or staging themselves to become CISOs that started off as Intel analysts. They started off as vulnerability management type folks or people working in the Intel side and growing and understanding that information is key, Intel is better, and how to manage all that things and understand that, 1 year out isn't where you need to be. You need to be constantly mitigating these threats, managing these things, looking at what's going on daily, interactively, and finding ways to hopefully bridge the gap between the human and the machine and start to automate out those responses. And so as we look at the growth, there's not a lack of information. There's not a lack of intelligence. There's just a lack of people who have access to it and a lack of the ability to actually automate and orchestrate it out for various reasons. And so when you start to couple, once again, good intelligence with good enrichment and good procedural stuff and technology stack there, throw up some orchestration automation around all that stuff, and now you're starting to move at the speed of where the threat actors are. And I think that's key. You're never going to overcome the hump completely, but you can at least get pretty close to getting on top of that swell and starting to ride the wave back down with the threat actors. But it's going to require, once again, doing stuff routinely and regularly, not every year, but daily kind of actions. And then it require automating and orchestrating out all these things. And more importantly, it's going to require talking to the guy sitting 2 cubicles over to you so you have the total picture. And so those are things to kind of start moving the ball forward and hopefully start to overcome what threat actors have been doing for years. So information sharing 101.
And that's a good point, Neil. And we've all hit upon this, that, we've got to get away from that. Hey, let me just check this off, on a semi-regular basis. You know what? You talked about, Neil, the speed at which the threat actors are moving. So let's talk about this. Sri, let's move over to the dark side and let's talk about then what is the next evolution of ransomware in your opinion?
So ransomware is a move up the stack. I've been talking about this for a while, several industry leaders. As we're seeing an evolution in CISOs who are coming from more development backgrounds, threat intel, and vulnerability management. So the threat actors are also moving up the stack. They're getting sophisticated. They're using automation. They're using orchestration. They're sharing information, right? Anything what we're doing on the positive side, the bad guys have better infrastructure and better sharing because they don't have to comply with anything. They don't have to worry about the SEC. They don't have to worry about stock market, right? All they care is, can I exchange a Bitcoin and all is well? Or I believe in an ideology. That's what matters to me, right? It doesn't need any currency. So what I'm seeing is there is the financial motive which we created. That's why ransomware is successful. We continue to reward bad behavior. So as long as we continue to do that, these guys will continue to innovate because there's money in it, right? There's an economical incentive. There's always this ideology thing, right? I'm going to support a ideology, whether it's Peter with a political party or a movement, right? They're going to continue to do that. And they will continue to invest in automation and machine learning. And they'll continue to invest in information sharing much better than we do on the defense side. So in a nutshell, they're going to move up the stack to software as a service. They're going to focus on open source because there is a big open source movement right now. They will focus on no code to less code libraries, which we continues to reuse in multiple products. We have seen that with Apache struts. Neil talked about Angular. So we're starting to see this very lightweight components used in millions and millions of products where all you have to do is go find one vulnerability and exploit it, and you get into a massive portion of the internet. We're continuing to see a different trend. So SaaS, open source will be the key mantra for these guys to continue. And one new area we're starting to see and expand into another is mobile. Pegasus was the first malware/ransomware we started seeing expand into the mobile devices with Android and with iPhone, iOS. It's a very interesting threat vector. And we're starting to see expansion into the industrial OT and IoT systems as well. So those are the two emerging areas we should pay attention to.
Aaron, Cybersecurity Works, anything that you would add to what Sri said about what this next evolution of ransomware will be?
I absolutely agree with Srinivas. I think that piggybacking on what he said, I mean, back to the whole DevSecOps thing, side of the world, I think we see a lot of customers where they have cloud misconfigurations, or they have keys that are in their code repositories, or they're hard coding in their applications. You know, we see this all the time, and a lot of that's low hanging fruit for the bad actors. You know, the other side, you know, and I'm gonna just throw out another one. NPM is another, you know, major library out there that's being used by a lot of organizations, and there's been, you know, malware found in it. They've had some zero-day issues with it that have just been found recently, and it's such an easy target for bad actors to target these platforms. And a lot of these are so complicated. They have so many contributors that are contributing code to this, and they consume so many other libraries down the whole supply chain that it gets really, really complicated. And so I think we have more and more of our customers that are coming to us, and they're starting to gain traction and maturity around their infrastructure and their applications kind of holistically. But I think they're seeing where some of these challenges are from a DevSecOps perspective, and where their supply chain comes from, where their code is. I think that's just going to be a huge next challenge for everyone right now.
Neil, let's turn to you. So what we talked before about, hey, you know what? Rather than just focusing on minimum compliance, you can make this more routine maintenance, not annually, not quarterly, but daily. But what are some other mistakes that organizations are making today that are leaving them open for attack?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to collaboration and breaking down, once again, those stovepipes, right? The walls that exist, internal and external of an organization. I come from a military background, but I've also worked in the ISAC and ISAC world a lot. So information sharing analysis centers and organizations. And, you know, I see a massive value added every time someone's able to reach across the other side, internal or external, and start to facilitate conversations with each other around what's going on. You can see the exponential increase in capability and this overarching kind of buffer that starts to come out from those interactivities within your security stack and what's going on, right? Once again, context is key. Enrichment is key to getting things done. Being able to break down those walls and reach out to other influences within your org, people who have a better understanding of, you know, maybe that's a better understanding of the firewalls versus your understanding of email gateways. Or maybe it's the IT guy who set up the gateway itself, right? Being able to have conversations with those people who understand those technology stacks, understand what's wrong, what's good, what's not, and make this an actual conversation of what's going on within your org. And on that same vein, you know, kind of coalescing all this into what Cyware's started dubbing as a fusion center, bringing in all these disparate entities together into one kind of platform view to allow them to both share information as well as to work on these things in a collaborative nature. You know, it's one thing to sit there and send an email to so-and-so across the hallway, but it's another thing we can actually start to bring all that data into one cohesive platform, leverage that from an enrichment capability, leverage things and intel coming from a company like Cybersecurity Works, and then the additional enrichment and items that you can work within Ivanti all together in one cohesive fusion model. And then when you get it all together, we're all speaking the same language, we're all standardized around the same action items, and we're all producing the same outputs with the same end goal of, you know, raising the overall security posture for us all, right? So at the end of the day, you know, making sure intel is accessible to all, making sure everybody has the same viewpoints at the end of the day to work within that intel and that data stream. And then furthermore, having the right ways in play to automate and orchestrate out that value put, right? So it's one thing to have all that information and work together. You still need to do something with it. And once again, like we've talked about earlier, if you're not orchestrating and automating things out, you're way behind the power curve here.
Love it, Neil.
So Shri,
We're speaking the language rather than speaking Hindi, Telugu, English, French, and Spanish. We all speak English. Don't you love that?
Right? Exactly.
all right, Shri, Neil's talking about these fusion centers. What are some other ways or best ways for individuals within an organization to protect against potential ransomware attack?
So it boils down to the fundamentals, Adrian. I mean, I keep talking about one common theme here is cyber hygiene. Nothing beats that, right? I mean, we are trained to floss our teeth every day. I don't think, or brush our teeth, if not floss our teeth, right? At least we do one of those. I mean, that's the same thing. Why is it different? You don't brush your teeth for 2 weeks, you'll end up in a dentist's office. The same thing. You don't take care of your systems. You don't take care of the code. You don't take care of your intelligence and alerts. You'll end up in an emergency room like ransomware. So cyber hygiene is extremely important. And if you look at CMMC from the federal government, if you look at the continuous diagnostics and mitigation, if you look at the October release of the most exploitable CISA catalog, they all tie back to one thing: vulnerabilities with exploits actively used by the bad guys. That's exactly what ransomware is focusing on. And the theme goes back to be resilient, be proactive, take care of your cyber hygiene. That's on the proactive side. And Neil touched a little bit on automation and SOAR. The key is, for whatever reason, right, we call it an asymmetric threat. You try to defend yourself, but the bad guy needs to know one thing. You as a defender needs to have the complete armor. I mean, Neil will appreciate it, right? If you go back to our Desert Storm 1, we were shooting cardboards, right? I mean, all they had to do is cardboards, and we had to keep firing missiles. That's what we're dealing with, a complete asymmetric threat. We have everything to lose. The bad guy, all he needs is time and a laptop and an internet connectivity. So with that in mind, we got to really be resilient, be proactive. In an absence of that, we should be super prepared for recovery. If something has to happen to you, you got to have proper recovery in place, whether it's business continuity, whether it's your backups, right? So those are the two key things that come into play. What is my true BCPDR? What is my recovery strategy? And then, of course, you need to have response capabilities as well. So a lot of people can get confused between recovery versus response. Recovery should be top of mind, and then response can follow it, where notification, forensics, a lot of things kind of can take a long tail, and then remediation comes in. It's a 3 R's, right? It's recovery, response, and remediation. They all come in together. Remember the 3 R's and prioritize them.
Hey, Sri, I'm just going to tell you, I have an admission here is I don't floss every day. My wife, she flosses like 3 times a day. I'm telling you, man, she's got a great smile, great set of choppers. And I'm envious of her. And I hope my dentist is not listening. I hope my dentist is not a cybersecurity, wannabe.
So we're going to take you off our dental group policy, Adrian. We can't afford all the dental this year.
All right. Hey, guys, let's take this home. We went a little bit longer today than our normal Ivanti Insights podcast, but we thought it was worth the time. So I didn't want to cut things short. So we're going to take things home. Aaron, I'm going to ask you to lead us off. What's your one key takeaway from what we talked about today that if they missed anything else you want listeners to remember?
So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to do 2. I'm going to, again, I was just about to mention the backup strategy and the patching with Srinivas. He just brought that up. I think that the key there is, being able to, if you have a great patching strategy, if you do succumb to ransomware, it's one of the best remedies to be able to just blow it away, start from scratch. And we've seen that with a lot of different organizations where they have that, they're able to use that strategy, and it's a great tactic for that. So that's the one thing. And then I would just go back to frequency. I think organizations really need to focus on how do they increase this frequency? How do they start to focus on the automation? How do they start to do things more frequent than what they were doing yesterday? If they're struggling just to get something done once, make sure you get it done once. If you're doing it once a year and you're checking that box from a compliance perspective, push it to quarterly, push it to monthly, push it to continuous. And there's a lot that goes into that. And I think you have to holistically have a conversation with your leadership, with your technical team. You need to understand what your capabilities are internally. And I think you're going to have to think outside the box to make sure that you can increase that frequency.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Neil from Cyware, and folks, that's CYWARE. Neil, summarize your one key takeaway from today.
There's a great bit of data out there in Intel. There's a lot of things that we understand are wrong with what we're doing and not doing. And like Aaron mentioned, once again, we're moving from hopefully an annual process to a daily process. And the only way you're really going to ever effectively do that is to understand the fundamentals of SOAR, like Sri mentioned earlier. Automation, orchestration from the ground up. It's more than just responding to emails and mail spam events as your primary. If you're getting something to do that, congratulations, you're on the right step. Learn how to do this from the ground floor up. Make it a part of vulnerability management. And once again, you're moving further out in front of the threat actors and what they're doing. And oddly enough, like Sri also mentioned, you're really mimicking what they're doing. They're automating, they're orchestrating. Why the heck aren't we? And for me, getting over that hump, understanding that needs to take place now sooner than later can help you overcome a lot of the other hurdles you're already managing right now.
Thank you, Neil. Sri, my main man here at Ivanti, take us home.
Absolutely. So one thing I always tell people is if you can't see it, if you can't smell it, if you can't hear it, you can't do anything about it, right? The basic sense organs, taste, smell, and vision. Same thing applies to ransomware. A lot of people think we have a control. I'm surprised, intrigued, and shocked. Whenever we take the vulnerability data and we show them their exposures, they're like, wow. It boils down to understanding your ecosystem. From what devices do we have? What software are we building and are we using? What user access do we have? And what software access do we have? That's the key. APIs are a culprit to that. You got to think about access. You got to think about users. You got to think about your software and your devices. Once you put that together and have a clear understanding of your exposures, then the rest will fall in line, right? Neil talked about automation. Aaron talked about continuous. Have that visibility. Understand your exposures. Then you can put together a prioritization to actually address that. So that's what I want the users to leave with. Identify your blind spots. Ensure that these blind spots don't become accidents. That's it.
So just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There's a lot more to ransomware than meets the eye. Is that fair to say?
Yep. Don't be an ostrich.
Yeah, I like it. All right. Hey, Ray, great to have you on the Ivanti Insights again. And we want to give a big hand to Neil and Aaron coming from Cyware and Cybersecurity Works to join us here today. Folks, it is the Ransomware Index Spotlight Report. You should be able to find it from the homepage of Ivanti.com. And if you don't, for some reason, you know what? There's a link right in the description of this podcast, whether you're on Spotify, Apple, or on Ivanti.com. So with that, hey, gentlemen, really appreciate you joining us today. Look forward to, we should do this again when the next ransomware report rolls around, especially if there's some different findings. And until then, just happy holidays, gentlemen. Thanks for your time today. And everyone out there, thanks for listening. Until next time, stay safe, be secure, and keep smiling.